It's not so much about working on your bike, it's about maintaining it and taking good care of it and keeping it in good working order. So this is a super important topic. Don't overlook it. What's amazing to me, there's a lot of cyclists that have been riding for years that overlook some of the basics that we're going to go over here. So what this session is about, it's not really so much about working on your bike and spending your entire weekend working on your bike. And that's great if you want to do that and take things apart and build your bike. That's great. And I have an advanced course for that. But this is the basics that everybody needs to really kind of master. So let's just go right into it here. So you need to know basic tools. Okay, that's sort of a given, but there are a few basic tools that make it so much easier to take care of your bike and do some basic repairs. You must absolutely know how to change a flat quickly without a lot of stress. And I know this is a big one, and there's so many cyclists that don't ever master this. I see them, they're out on the road, they have a nice road bike, they have all the gear, and they're standing on their cell phone calling their spouse or their friend to come pick them up because they got a flat. And there's no reason for that. There's no reason. Just like anything else, changing a flat, it's not that difficult, but it does take practice. Most of us don't get that many flats, so we don't have a chance to really practice it. So that's really important. I like everybody to shoot for 5 minutes. So when you actually do get a flat, it's just a hiccup in your ride. You stop, you change it, you keep going, no big deal. I mean, how many of people listening have been out on a ride, gotten a flat, and it ruined your whole day? You're late for work or maybe late getting home because you're taking your kids to soccer practice or whatever because you got a flat. And it shouldn't be that way. When I go on a ride, maybe I get a flat, I change it, I keep going. And I'm back home maybe a couple of minutes later, but it's fine. So you need to also be able to keep your bike cleaned and lubed. And I'm not talking about this from a vanity point of view of keeping your bike looking pretty, although that's nice. It's keeping your bike cleaned and lubed so it works right and keeps it in good working order overall. And the other thing basics that you need to know are how to make some really minor adjustments and repairs to your bike. So let's start out with the tools. In the picture here, you'll see some basics. I think most people attending this have these, but it's worth mentioning that you see that bag? It's a teeny little bag, and that's really all you need as a road cyclist is a teeny little bag with the spare tube, a patch kit, tire levers, and some sort of air inflation device. You can have an optional tool that you take with you, but that's really not that necessary. Those are the basics. You should have it. Something to note here is you don't need a big bag. Actually, a bigger bag is a hindrance unless you're touring or something. So on a road bike, that little bag is packed tight and you tuck it under your seat and you strap it in and it doesn't sway around. It doesn't make noise. And it's just really nice to have that small bag. You see a lot of cyclists starting out and they get a big bag so they can put extra stuff in there. And the bag ends up empty most of the time. And then, it makes a lot of noise. It flaps around when you stand up. Keep it small, keep it compact, keep it full. One note on these air inflation devices, I pictured here these little CO2 cartridges. And I personally like those. But there's a downside. The nice thing about the CO2s is they fill the tire up. It doesn't take a lot of effort. The bad thing is, once you use up the air that's in there, you're done. You don't have any more air. And 2, it's hard to regulate the speed at which the air goes in. And that can cause trouble. In the middle of the screen there, you see sort of a pump CO2 combo. And that's a really sort of nice compromise. You have your CO2 cartridge for your first flat. If you get multiple flats on a ride, you have the pump as backup. Now, if you've ever pumped a road bike tire up to say 100 psi or more with one of the small hand pumps, you'll know that very few of them make an easy job of it. It's sort of like a arm workout pumping the tire up with a pump. It can be done, and some of the bigger pumps that you carry on your bike are pretty good, actually. But most of us don't get that many flats, and the CO2s work just fine. So you'll want, if you're going to maintain your bike, these are things that you should have at home. Absolute must, and I know that there's people listening that don't have a really good floor pump at home. A really good floor pump with a built-in gauge makes life so much easier. That one picture there is a Lysine pump. I really like that pump. It's a great pump, and it works well, and it's heavy duty. You're going to spend a lot for a nice pump, but it's worth it because you need to pump your tires up before every ride anyway. A special note on floor pumps, though, is when you, if you're a smaller person and you don't have a lot of upper body strength, you might be better off having a pump with a smaller barrel. I see, especially like my wife, she has trouble getting a bike tire to 100 psi in a lot of floor pumps. That particular pump is pretty good. So make sure you try out the pump that you're going to get, or get one with a narrow barrel. Or if it says, look at the reviews, if it says it's good for smaller people. Stand, that thing on the left, that red thing, is a bike stand. So that's not a must, but boy, does it make cleaning your bike and just, working on it so much more pleasurable. There's lots of different brands and models on the market. That happens to be my favorite. It's from a company called Feedback Sports. It collapses. It's lightweight. It's very stable. Again, it's not required, but boy, it makes things nice. That thing in the middle is a little fold-up multi-tool, and you're going to need some Allen wrenches for home, and you could just get one of these tools and keep it on your bike if you want, or just have one that you keep at home. And that thing on the wall there is a bunch of Allen keys. You may want to get a set like that for home. Gloves are nice. I don't like to get my hands dirty, and having a nice heavy-duty gloves for working on a bike really makes it easy. And, like when you lube your chain, there's no reason to get all greasy. You put gloves on, you lube your chain, you clean it, take the gloves off, and you're good to go. You don't have to go and wash your hands. An option, if you travel with your bike, you might want to invest in a real pedal wrench. They're not very expensive, and it is the tool that you need to properly install and take your pedals off. A thing to note here, if you travel with your bike and you try and, if some bike shop puts your pedals on with a real pedal wrench and you get on there with the little crescent wrench and trying to remove the pedals, you're not going to be able to do it because the pedal wrench, you have a lot more leverage. So that's optional if you travel with your bike. Other things you want at home, of course, a bunch of rags, soap, degreasers, and lube. I'm not going to get into lubes and degreasers, which ones you should use. Soap, you want to be careful with what soap you use. You want to make sure it's aluminum friendly and it's not too harsh. I suggest that you get one that's made for bikes, although you could also use some of the others, but a lot of them aren't aluminum friendly and they will actually cause corrosion. So be careful with that. Degreasers, personally, I don't use them very much, but I do like the citrus-based degreasers. They're They can be kind of harsh, but they work well, and they're sort of biodegradable. And lubes, boy, that's a big subject. There's so many good ones. You want one that stays kind of dry, is the only thing I can say. Some of them are wet, but you got to be careful which one you use and not too much. So a big thing about working on your bike is knowing the names of stuff. And you don't have to be a master at any of this, and you don't have to know all these names. But I wanted you to see this image and sort of study it for a minute and see if you can pick out anything on the bike that you didn't know the name of. And so that way, when you do go in the shop and you say, my rear shifter thingy, which meaning the rear derailleur, isn't working right, the mechanics are going to know what you're talking about. So take a look over this picture and tell me if there's anything, just comment in the chat box if there's anything that you didn't know the name of. I'll give you just a minute there. So we're going to go into changing a flat. I want to go back to this just for 1 second. Nomenclature, knowing the names of things it is pretty important. I didn't get into the names of the frame parts and things in this picture, but this gives you a really good idea. And it is important to know this stuff. Again, I don't expect you to be a master at this, but just kind of have a pretty good idea. Changing a flat. So the biggest thing with changing a flat, of course, would be prevention first. If you can avoid getting a flat in the first place, you're going to be way better off. Obviously, it's easier and everything. And a big part of that is you can avoid most flats by doing just a few things. One is buying good tires. Good tires can avoid punctures. They can make the bike ride differently. And so it's a really important thing to pay attention to. Now, that doesn't mean, I'm not saying go out and buy the heaviest duty tire possible so you don't get flats. There are tires where you probably won't get flats, but they don't ride very nice. So it's sort of a compromise on where you ride, how you ride, and like if you ride in an area where there's a lot of glass, you might want to have a really, really puncture resistant tire. But if you ride in an area where there's not that much glass on the road, you could get away with a tire that's not quite so puncture resistant and actually rides better and is lighter weight. So you kind of have to weigh those. One of the brands, my favorite brand, is Schwalbe. I really, really like their tires. They have excellent puncture resistance, and especially their high-end tires are very, very light, but they are pretty darn pricey. And something else important about tires is certain tires are change better. They're easier to get on and off the rim. This is an important thing. A lot of people struggle sometimes getting their tire on and off the rim. And oftentimes, it's not you, it's the tire that you have in combination with the rim that you have. So pay attention to that. Ask around what tire works good with what rim. Proper inflation. That is going to avoid a lot of flats too. So keeping your tires up to pressure, pumping them up every ride, but not too high. Depends on how much you weigh, how you ride, but not overinflating your tires and not underinflating them. And then, inspecting often. It goes without saying, you can get a little chunk of glass or a little piece of wire sticking in your tire, and it may not give you a flat right away, but after you ride for a while, it sort of wiggles its way through the tire and gives you a flat. That's where cleaning the bike comes in, is if you clean your bike, it gives you a chance to inspect tires and things like that to avoid flats and problems on the side of the road. Doesn't have to take a lot of time. Okay, so One of the first things that's really important changing a flat is be able to take the wheels on and off. And I know a lot of you say, well, I know how to do that. Well, a lot of people get this wrong, and this acts as a reminder. So here I pulled a quick release out of a bike, and you see those little springy things? And what those do is just center the quick release. They're really not necessary, but it makes the wheel easier to get on and off. If you put that little springy thing in the wrong direction, like the one on the right there, it can keep the quick release from closing properly and could make you crash and die. So, and I'm not joking, people have died because their wheel has fallen off. So it is a really, really important thing. The quick release, it's important to understand how it works and to close it properly. One of the things that I really like to see is that lever, when it's closed, sort of points towards the back of the bike or up, kind of tucks up in the frame somehow. And that way nothing's going to catch on it. Although I have to admit, I've never seen anything catch on one. It's just sort of, it's a little bit cleaner and there's less chance. I see a lot of people, they'll have their quick release and it's closed towards the front of the bike. And you definitely don't want that. Okay. So first thing you need to do is remove the wheel. This is for the front wheel. So you flip that lever open on the quick release. You kind of just pull it open. Then you unscrew it a little bit to get past these little tabs on the fork there, right where the arrows is pointing. That's as far as you need to unscrew it. The rear wheel, you don't have to do that, but the front has these little tabs. So if you don't close the quick release, the wheel doesn't easily fall off. So you flip open your brake release lever, open the quick release, and then install the wheel. It really is pretty much that easy on the front. The back is a little different. Still same steps. You're gonna release the brake, open the quick release. Actually, I put this in the wrong order here. Is you actually want to shift. That's the first thing you do when you get a flat is shift it to the smallest cog. Now, this isn't absolutely necessary, but it's a reference point. You actually don't have to put it in the smallest cog. It doesn't matter which cog it's in. What matters is when you go to put it back on, that you put the chain back on the same cog that you took it off. And so it's easiest if you put it in the bottom one and just remember that. So you want to do that before you open the brake and before you open the quick release. And then when you take the rear wheel off, you kind of get behind it. Look at the picture on the right. And you sort of grab the derailleur and just sort of pop the wheel out. And it should literally, when you pull that derailleur back on its pivot, the wheel kind of just falls out if you've done it right. And it's like magic when you do it. It's not a lot of struggle. There's no turning the bike upside down. You just kind of open the quick release, open the brake, and flip the derailleur back and literally lift the frame up. The wheel comes out. And you kind of have to weave it out from the chain, lay your bike on the side, but lay it with the derailleur side up, chain side up. Just lay it on the side, and then you're ready to start changing the tire. So here's a picture. Sorry, I'm in the picture here. I didn't want to have that, but I'm showing how you use a quick release. You see the picture on the left? When you take a tire off, that's a little slice of a tire. See that little spoon side of the lever? It's like it hooks under the bead of the tire. And that's what you use to take the tire off. And you see on the right side, I'm holding the tire lever with the little spoon thing facing the other direction. And so that's when you're putting the tire back on. So that's sort of important to know when you're using these quick release levers. But here's the thing. Quick release levers, gosh, I'm calling them the wrong thing. Tire levers are problematic. It's very easy to pinch the tube. They're kind of a pain to work with, but they're sort of a necessary evil. Sometimes you need them, but there is another way. Tool-free method. This is my method for changing tires, changing flats. I hardly ever use tools. Sometimes you need them on a tough tire rim combination, but when you get the right tire, when you figure out which tire works best with your rim, you can use this tool-free method. And it's fast, it's safe, you won't damage the tire, and it's actually relatively easy to do. Now, a lot of people think this is about strength, and it is not at all. It's about the way you're moving. That's really what it is. So if you look very, very carefully on the left side, precisely how my fingers are positioned. I'm grabbing the tire. Of course, I've already let all the air out of the tire. And I'm grabbing the tire and I'm lifting it, pushing with my thumbs, pushing the tire sort of up. And you see how that gap on the right side starts to open up. And I'm literally taking the entire tire off the rim. I'm not just taking one side off, I'm taking the whole thing off. So let's go to the next one. And I keep pushing and push it downward, and then the tire just pops off. It's like magic. So I just want to show again. See the hand position, push up and over. You sort of roll your fingers, and then you push down, and boom, tire pops off. Okay, so once you do that, then you put a new tube in, patch it, check for pinches, inflate, reinstall, check the brakes. Now, one thing that is surprising that I left out here is you've got to find what gave you the flat in the first place. I shouldn't have to say it, but a lot of people will miss it. And they get a flat and they're like, I don't know why I got a flat. And they just put a new tube in, they start riding, and boom, you got another flat. So don't put the tire back on until you have discovered why you got a flat in the first place. And most of the time, once you pull the tube out of the tire, you can run your finger around the inside and you'll find a piece of glass or whatever it is. You have to be careful because you can cut your fingers when you do that, and you need to get it out. Now, oftentimes, what gave you the flat is really, really, really teeny and you can't feel it. But keep trying. There'll be a few times where you just can't find it and you're like, oh, well, and I'll just have to deal with it. But if you keep looking and really push hard on the inside of there, look on the outside of the tire, usually you can find what gave you the flat. And if it's a piece of glass wedged in the rubber, you need to get that out. Really super important. On tubes and patches, I recommend in your bag you carry a spare tube and a patch kit. The spare tube is really what you want to use. That's easy. You take the old tube out, you put a new tube in. The patch kit is for your second and third flat. It's sort of back up. And then when you get home, you can patch the tube instead of doing it on the side of the road. Side of the road, people are waiting for you. You're sweating. You're stressed a little bit. You don't really want to be doing a patch there. If you have to, you can. And there's nothing wrong with the patch tube, by the way. Once you patch it, it's good. So you can patch a tube multiple times. So I usually wait till you get home, patch the tube there when you have your floor pump and you're not stressed, and then you're good. Make sure you always check your brakes too. Last thing you do before you take off and start riding, squeeze your brakes, make sure that you tighten them back up. Okay, so moving right along. One of my customers, I think actually is the one who said this, and she happens to be sort of obsessive on keeping her bike clean, but it is really important to keep a bike clean. It gives you a chance to inspect your bike and your tires. It slows the corrosion and saves the finish. And overall, it just kind of keeps everything, it saves everything. It's just like a car. Keep it in good shape, and it'll last a lot longer. It doesn't take a lot of time. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. You can go crazy and keep your bike spotless, but it's not really that necessary. But what's really important to me, especially with some of the modern high-tech carbon fiber bikes, is they can get cracks, okay, from crashing or whatever. And sometimes they're really small, and it takes a while for them to get big. And if you don't clean your bike, you're never going to see those cracks. And so when you wash your bike and clean it, it gives you a chance to look closely and inspect your bike and say, oh, this isn't working, or maybe your rear derailleur is seizing up because it's got corrosion in it or something. These are common things. And so that's really why you should be cleaning your bike. And actually, you're the one to clean it. Cycling is about, I don't know, to me, it's sort of an empowering sport. You go on your own, under your own power, and you should be able to clean your bike and know when something's not working right. Your life really does depend on it. That maybe is a little dramatic, but, things break on bikes and you have problems. And you'd like to know yourself that it's good. Corrosion, even though if you have a carbon fiber bike, lots of the parts are made out of different materials, aluminum, some are made out of steel. Things corrode, especially if you're a heavy sweater or you use energy drinks. They have a lot of salt in them. They can corrode things, even if you have a carbon fiber bike. And the finish on bikes can really get damaged. So no matter what your bike is made of, the finish can get damaged if you don't take care of it. Oh, and something else I should say here is, dang, these bikes are expensive. We spend a lot of money on our bikes, and, just taking care of some basic care here. Okay, so there's different methods for cleaning your bike. You can wipe it down, and you can wash it. Wipe down is pretty much what it says, is you can wipe it down with a damp cloth or a microfiber cloth, and just to clean it up, maybe you put some sort of potion on there that you wipe it down with, and that's great. And it's quick, but it doesn't actually clean the bike. It'll get off surface sweat and stuff, but it really doesn't clean it. And I'm not really opposed to wiping the bike down. It's fine, but you really need to wash the bike. Really, really wash it. That's the only thing that's really going to get rid of all the salt and all the buildup of snot and things from riding. You need to wash it. It's also one process for cleaning everything. You clean your chain, your gears, everything on the bike. And it's sort of like a deep clean. Something to note here, somebody's going to ask, well, how often should I wash my bike? Well, it depends on how much you ride, but generally I tell people, if you're an active cyclist and you ride, 3 or 4 days a week, maybe once a month, you can wash it. And in between, you could do wipe downs. And if you happen to have a really sweaty ride, or you ride in the rain, you definitely better wash it. Okay. So that's what I'm going to walk you through, how to wash a bike here, how to properly wash it. Okay. So a lot of people are going to cringe at this. They're like, oh my gosh, you're going to put water to your bike? That's going to ruin it. And actually, the truth is that it won't. Most of the bearings on modern road bikes have extremely good seals on the bearings, and it will seal out water from getting in there as long as you don't use high pressure. Never use a pressure washer on a bike, and never, ever, ever take a hose like I have in the picture there and hold it near the hubs. Especially high pressure. It's okay if it's dripping over it, but you don't want to use high pressure near any of the bearings, which are down near the crank, at the hubs, and at the headset, because that can actually inject water through the seals into the bearings, and water in bearings is a bad thing. But if you see I have a hose there, it's just like a garden hose with a shower on it for watering plants. That actually works well. It's not very high pressure, it's gentle, and it's not going to inject water into the bearings as long as I'm careful. Now, if I took that hose and I put it right next to the bearings, it may inject water in there. So basically the steps, what I like to do is I very quickly just rinse the bike down, get some of the loose stuff off. And then I take degreaser. I have like a little water bottle that I keep some citrus degreaser in. And I have one of these brushes. I think that's actually a regular dish brush you can get, or a pot scrubbing brush. You get it at any grocery store. It costs less than $1 usually. And it's fantastic. You dip it in your degreaser, hold it on the cogs like I am there, and I pedal the bike backwards until it scrubs that, really, gets it clean. I do the same on the chain rings, any place where there's gunk buildup on the drivetrain. Now I want to pay a little bit of attention here that I don't want to get that degreaser all over the frame. That citrus degreaser is pretty darn strong and it will damage finishes. So you do have to be careful with that, and you might want to make sure that you buy a degreaser that says it's safe for modern bike finishes. It's up to you. Don't just get the standard degreaser. Get the one that's safe. Something else to note is a lot of degreasers damage plastics, and there's a lot of plastic on a modern road bike. So pay attention to what you do. So anyway, regardless of what degreaser you use, you just kind of use a little bit there. You scrub your cogs, scrub the chain. Notice I'm not using any special bike cleaning gadgets. This is basic stuff here. Okay, then I have, see that brush? It's a regular automotive car brush. Those are fantastic. They're cheap, and I really like them. I have my soap and I scrub the bike down. You want to make sure that you don't use your nice clean brush on the greasy stuff on the frame, on the drivetrain, because if you do, you're going to smear that grease all over the frame. So I kind of avoid that area and scrub down everything, the brakes, the rims, everything, especially like the handlebars where you might sweat, and then just rinse it off. Pretty straightforward, right? Not that difficult. When's the last time you've done this to your bike? Okay, so just to give you an idea of how long this process takes me, and I hope that you can do the same. If you have a stand like that, the entire process is probably less than 5 minutes. So yeah, that excuse, oh, I don't have time to do that, or I don't, from thinking about doing it to being done, rinsed down, lubed, maximum of 10 minutes. So it really does not take a lot of time. No excuses on this. Okay, and then, of course, after you clean your bike, you wash it, then you need to lube it. You always, anytime your bike gets wet, you need to lube the chain afterwards. So if you're in the rain, you need to lube the chain. There are some lubes out there that can tolerate the rain better, and you might be able to get away with it, but they tend to be really viscous and really greasy and cause a lot of buildup. So I'll leave that up to you. That's your choice. But whatever lube that you do use, the application method is essentially the same. And you'll see a lot of people will put lube on and put it on the cogs in the back. You don't want to do that. The only thing that needs lube are the inside of the links in the chain. That's it. And you don't want lube on anything else. So my method is you take your rag in that right hand picture. I hold it on the opposite, around the chain, so because I don't want to get that lube on the brake surface on the tire. And so I put a drop in each link. You see right where the dropper is there on that little roller? That's where you need the lube. You don't need it anywhere else. So if I'm in a rush, I'll just go kind of down the chain. But I know I'm using way too much lube. You want to have just enough, but not too much. So the real way to do it is to put one drop in each link. It doesn't actually take as long as you think. It only takes about a minute or so to go around the whole chain. It's 120 links roughly. But you can also just kind of go down the line. If you have a spray lube, it's the same method. It's going down into the chain, not from the side. The side doesn't need lube, the inside of the chain does. Now, here's the part where everybody skips. Once you lube it, you've got to wipe it off. So lube the chain, get all the way around, and then take your rag and just grab it. That's when you have your rubber gloves, you have a rag, you grab the chain in your hand with the rag, and you just kind of rub it back and forth and keep going until there's hardly anything on the outside of the chain. It should look fairly dry. And it's a good way to clean the chain too. You're sort of cleaning and lubing in one process. And then when you're done, kind of wipe off the excess off the chain rings or anywhere you see excess lube, and you're done. And you'll see when you ride the first time, extra lube is going to ooze out of the chain. So that's the proper way to lube it. The picture, the lube in the picture there, ProLink, Pro Gold, ProLink, that's one of my favorite lubes. There's all kinds of good ones out there, but that's one that I do like. Okay. Other places on your bike to lube are your derailleur pivot points. They're just put a little drop of lube there. They're not that necessary, but especially the front derailleur, those tend to get clogged up with energy drinks or sweat. The rear derailleur is usually not that bad. It's not really that big of an issue. Any brake pivot points, you may have to lube those occasionally. And your cables. So where your cable goes into the housing is a place where you want to put a little lube there possibly. And then where it goes under the bottom of the frame, depending on your configuration on your bike, you'd want to put a little bit of lube there. That's a really big collector of sweat and buildup from energy drinks. It spills out of the bottles. It goes down to the bottom bracket underneath there where the cable goes through that little guide, and it gets gunked up, and that can actually mess up your shifting. So you want to make sure when you're washing the bike that you clean that, and then make sure you put just a teeny bit of lube there to keep them going smooth through there. And that's pretty much it for lubing your bike. Again, that entire process from, oh, I'm going to wash my bike, to washing it, scrubbing it, inspecting, lubing, maybe on 10 to 15 minutes. And then I can go on with my day. So it really doesn't have to take a lot of time. If you want to take time and do a spotless job, that's great. But this is the basics that you should do. Okay. Few other items real quick here is minor adjustments and repairs. One of the big things is chains fall off. Sorry for the typo in there, but chains do fall off if things aren't adjusted right. If things are adjusted well, generally your chain shouldn't fall off. It can still happen even if things are adjusted perfectly. If you happen to be shifting gears and you're riding on a really bumpy surface on cobblestones or something, your chain can just fly right off. That does happen. And if it does, there's a really cool magic trick, I call it. So if your chain falls off to the outside, no need to panic and stop and get all greasy. Shift your derailleur, coast immediately if your chain falls off. Shift your front derailleur to the small chainring, and then pedal slowly, very slowly, and usually your chain will fall right back into place and get back on without nothing happened. If it does fall off, try and avoid turning your bike upside down. It makes things confusing. You just, get one finger greasy and pull the chain back into place and get it back on. And then if this happens multiple times, go to your bike shop and have them see if they can figure out why your chain is falling off. Minor gear adjustments. So let's see if I can walk you through this. So your rear derailleur, when you shift one click, the derailleur should move a certain amount. And if it's not lined up just so, it'll move a little bit and then it'll go clunk, 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 clunk. It makes noise. And it's really annoying, and your shifts don't exactly give you confidence. So what happens is your bike has cables, and the cables actually stretch over time. And so the derailleur is not centered. So if it was adjusted perfectly, and then over time it will come out of adjustment because the cable is stretched. So you need to take up that slack. And on your rear derailleur, where the cable goes in, there's like a little knob there. And you would want to, most bikes when they go out of adjustment, the cable is stretching. So you would want to unscrew that little knob. Now, when I say unscrew it, I'm saying like 1/8 of a turn at a time, which is a very small adjustment. So you say your gears are clanking, you unscrew that just a teeny bit, try your gears again, do it a teeny bit again. And if you don't get it within a quarter turn or maybe a half a turn, most likely there's something else going on. But if your gears were working fine and then suddenly they're not working fine, it's probably because the cable's stretched and you're just going to unscrew that screw. I'm unable in this seminar to go into super detail on this. So you just be careful with it. You're not going to damage anything, but you may make your gears not work good. But it would be worth practicing at home and just unscrewing that screw a little bit. Brake centering is something else that's important. You want your brakes, when you squeeze your brakes, that both pads hit the rim at the same time. And if you have the bike on a stand, just kind of look at it visually. And most brakes have like a little screw adjustment, centering screw on the top. And you just unscrew that screw or turn it in to center the brakes. Very easy to do. What you shouldn't do is just turn the brake. You'll see a lot of people do that. And that's sort of a no-no because you're actually loosening the brake mount to the bike. So if you do that, on the back side of the brake, you'll see the mounting bolt. So you'd want to make sure that's tight if you're just going to rotate the brake. What else? Hit me with your questions. Hit me with your questions on repairs or any of this that we've covered here. This seminar was sort of based. I have a basic bicycle maintenance course, which this is the very, very brief version of that. I think it's like 8 hours long. And so we cover all this stuff I covered here in really deep detail. There's also an advanced course for those of you that really want to get into super, building a bike and doing gear adjustments and things like that. So anyway, hit me with your questions. I hope you'll have some questions here. That's a little bit of an old picture. I got a few more pounds than in the picture there right now. The Fluent Cyclist is my site where I have the basic bicycle maintenance class and the advanced bicycle maintenance class. And you're welcome to check that out. So I'll see you in the chat. Please send in your questions. Note that there is a slight delay in the chat. But I'm going to be here and answer all your questions. Well, thanks everybody for being so involved in the chat. I actually don't need these to hear myself. I just want to double check and make sure. Can you guys all hear me? Just please type in the chat. Give me just a second here. We're going to totally go through all these questions in the Q&A. Real quick, I just want to mention a couple of things. We are going to give away the jersey for the best question. So keep your questions coming in the chat. We'll go for a bit and we'll get through as many of these as we possibly can. Let's see. Also, if you like this session and any of the others, you can watch them again and again if you want. Buy a VIP pass and you have a full year's worth of access to all the sessions. Okay, so let's go right in. I'm going to start early on here. Let's see. Okay, Matt says, wait, you mean you're supposed to remove all the grit and grime from the drivetrain? I thought that was how you season the bike. Isn't that what keeps it together? I love that's hilarious. I find it challenging to patch tires on the fly. Is there a trick to seeing where the problem is on the road? I have a patch kit, one where you have to sand out the tire. Okay, so patches, you can patch them on the side of the road. I just prefer, because it's easier and quicker, just to use your spare tube. I use the patches as sort of a secondary backup. When you get home, you can patch the tube. There's no problem with patching tubes on the side of the road. You can do it and it's great, but sometimes you're sweaty and you know, maybe a group is waiting for you. Nobody really wants to wait for that. So and as far as the type of patches, I'm going to answer two questions here. And a lot of people talked about the types. There's the stick-on patches that I showed in the video there, which is basically, it's almost like a little sticker, and you just kind of stick it on. And then there's the glue type patches, which are the old-fashioned type. You have to sand it, put the glue on, let it dry. Those are both, I found both of them are very, very good. In the stick-on patches, the main one that I'm familiar with that works really well is the Park one. There are lots of other brands, and I've had less than stellar with some of the others, but I know for sure the Park, I can recommend that one. As far as the glue-on patch kits, just the generic El Cheapo will work fantastic. It's all the same stuff. It's really more of an application. When you're riding and you get a flat, use your spare tube to fix the flat, unless you get multiple flats. Save the patches, do that at home when you have time, and it's a lot easier. So let's see. So Matt says he's responding to Gary's comment on the factory lube is the best. So the factory lube is actually pretty good. That comes on a chain, although it's not exactly designed to keep away grit and grime from the road. So, you know, when I use a new chain, I don't clean it with solvent. The manufacturers actually do tell you to do that, but you'll find that the factory lubes do tend to pick up road grit and grime. So I just put the chain on, and I don't worry that much about it. Put the chain on, ride it, and on the next time when you lube it, you're going to clean off that factory lube. Dave says, in lieu of the oils that we buy at the bike store, a friend used motor oil. Says there's no or limited difference. Can this be a replacement for lube and oil for your chain? So the answer is don't use it, man. You know, we're talking, you can buy a thing of the best quality, one of the best quality lubes on the market for $10 for a little thing, and it will last you a year if you use it correctly, even if you're riding a lot. So, you know, to me, that's pretty darn cheap, and there's no reason to go and use oil that's going to pick up grit and make your bike disgusting and make it really difficult to keep your bike clean. You know, bike lubes are designed specifically for that application to resist dirt as best they can, and motor oil is definitely not a substitute. Christina says, how do you know when your chain needs to be clean, and what's the best way to do this? And what is the best way to do this? So Christina, your chain, it's sort of a short from the obvious that, you know, when your chain looks dirty, but the method I put in the video there, and the method that I highly recommend, and pretty much all pro mechanics, this is what we do, is instead of thinking of let your chain get dirty and clean it, just lube it often, and that's lubing is part of the cleaning process. That way you sort of avoid all of the gadgets, and it just makes it so much easier. I recommend roughly, despite what the bicycle lube companies tell you, you really need to lube your chain very, very often. Maybe 100 miles. Yeah, sometimes more than that when it squeaks, of course. Dave says, when I press my brake levers, I get a squeaking noise. Is it time to change out the cables and housing? Well, tough question. Could be your levers. You need lubricant. Could be your brake calipers. The bearings inside the calipers are squeaky. Could be the cables. It's really kind of a tough call, and you need to properly diagnose it and kind of squeeze the brake lever calipers on the frame without actuating the lever, and kind of squeeze them and see if you can hear a sound there. Try and loosen, hold the caliper and then pull the lever and see if the lever is making the noise. And then you can sort of isolate the cable. And so if the cables are squeaking, I can't get into the details. You could potentially lube the cable on the bike, but that's a little bit tricky, and you need a little more instruction to show you how to do that. Actually, I do show that in my basic bicycle maintenance course over on the Fluent Cyclists. By the way, it's only 27 bucks. It's a heck of a bargain. I think there's, I don't know, it's basically, I think about 6 hours of video going into detail on the stuff that I talked about here for $27. Okay. Let's see, moving right along. Alvaro says, is it normal to have a creaking carbon frame? Mine is creaking, is a creaking noise at the bottom bracket. So no, it is not normal, and you really need to be careful. If you have, your bike shouldn't creak. I don't care if it's carbon or whatever it is, but especially if it's carbon and it's creaking, most likely it's just the bottom bracket is moving, or maybe something's not tight enough, or maybe the bearings are bad. But it can be a crack. So carbon frames, and I've seen this many, many, many times, is they can get a small crack. And when you ride and you pressure the pedals, it goes creak, 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 creak. Usually it's the bottom bracket, but I have seen cracks, and this is one of the big reasons why you should clean your bike. Is it gives you a chance to very closely inspect the frame. You look closely and you look for the cracks. On a carbon frame, the cracks, any crack is bad. So a lot of people, when I do work with somebody, I'll inspect their bike and I say, oh, look, there's a crack there. And they're like, oh, yeah, I knew about that. No big deal. And while it is a big deal, it can crack, and it cracks and you die. So, and I'm absolutely serious on that. So no crack is okay. And the creaking is not okay. And I highly recommend that you go to a pro mechanic and have them check it out. If you're comfortable with it yourself, you can diagnose and figure it out on your own, but don't let that go. Okay, it's super important. Steve has a question. I've given up on trying to fix tubes. I just always carry 2 tubes. What's the best repair kit to fix tubes? I think I covered that. There's no best. For most of us, 1 tube is sufficient. Unless you happen to get tons of flats, 1 tube is usually fine. If I'm doing a lot of really long rides, like a lot of 100-mile rides every day or something like that, I might carry 2 tubes with me. But really 1 tube is plenty, and a patch kit that has 4 or 5 patches in there, and you'll be good 99% of the time. It's not a big deal. So Dave has a question here. I'm also finding that certain tires, no matter the debris, ends up getting a flat. Staples, nails, it doesn't matter which tire you have. Gator skin, armadillos, you still get a flat. Is there a recommended tire tube that is better than others? So tires are a really interesting topic, and it is certain tires are more puncture resistant than others. But here's the thing, is the more puncture resistant the tire, typically the less the tire doesn't roll as good, and maybe it doesn't, you lose some ride quality. So it's a balance between ride quality, weight, and puncture resistance. And you sort of have to balance that out based on where and how you ride. And my favorite brand are Schwalbe tires. They fit easy. This is a big deal, is get a tire that fits on your rim easily. And different brands will fit on different rims. There's manufacturing differences. So you might have, say, a Mavic rim, and a Continental tire may work good, or it may not. So you need to kind of experiment, ask your buddies which ones are easiest and which are not. So it's not just about the tire. Sure, there are certain things that you hit in the road that, it doesn't matter. You're going to get stuck. I'll tell you a short little anecdote. I was on a group ride a couple of years ago in February, way out in the middle of nowhere, and I got a flat in the middle of the pack, and I'm like, go ahead, I'll catch up. And I was going to take a shortcut and catch up. By the time I pulled to the side of the road, I looked down at my tire, and it was completely severed. I was completely screwed. There was no fixing it. There was nothing I could have possibly done. Of course, I didn't have any cell service, and I ended up getting, I went to a house. Somebody had to call my wife. It was cold. I had to wait 2 hours for her to come pick me up because I didn't even know where I was. So sometimes there's nothing you can do, but buy good tires and don't necessarily get the most puncture resistant. So I hope that helps. Victor, can you address this topic? QR on bikes with disc brakes, as more road bikes and cross bikes are showing up with disc this season. So, boy, I think we're going to see something interesting happen here, because quick release and disc brake, in mountain bikes, it's gone nearly completely away from regular quick releases. And I think eventually we'll see that on road bikes. But they can be tricky dealing with the disc brake and the quick release there, but I don't know what else to say there. Matt, talk about solid axle replacements. To be honest with you, I'm not really sure what you mean by that question. Maybe you're referring to changing out your axle to make it a bolt-on. So you don't need a quick release. I'm not certain. I'm not keen on that. Jessica says, can you use tubeless tire adhesive inside a tube in order to prevent flats? I saw a Cycling Weekly video on that. That's a great question. And not just tubeless tire goop, I call it goop. There's other goops that you can put in your tire to fix a flat. And as you might guess, I'm not keen on it. And I'll tell you my reason. It will work. Okay, first, to answer your question, it will work. But if you're relying on that, like a lot of triathletes in the triathlon community, they're really huge on this. I think it's made by Vittoria. They have a little compressed cartridge that's full of some hideous goop, and you inject it in the tire, and it fixes a flat. And it really does work. And there's potions that you can put in the tube it'll seal it up, sort of on some of the tubeless tires. It's the same potion. But the problem is, if it doesn't fix the flat, or when you go to change it, you have this hideous sticky goop that gets all over your bike, all over you. It's a pain to clean. And to be honest, there's really absolutely no need for it. Changing a tire is not a big deal. It takes practice. You have to learn it. It takes a little bit of effort, but it's not a big deal. So I generally don't recommend using any of the goops. You can use it if you choose, and they actually do work well. You know, to me, I think somebody mentioned about rolling resistance and stuff. You know, come on, it it doesn't really matter so much. I wouldn't worry about it. Nobody asked any question about tubeless tires. Tubeless tires are a special rim combination with the tire, and it's a sealed chamber in there, so you don't need a tube, and you inject. It has this hideous goop that goes in there. It's the same goop, and they're great, and you know, the ride quality is absolutely stellar with tubeless. Anyway, let's see. Dave says the best way to clean your drivetrain and derailleur. Well, I think I covered that mostly in the video. That is the best way to do it. That's a pro method. Okay, no need for all the chain cleaning gadgets. You don't need any of that. You can use it, but you know, eventually when you buy those chain cleaning things, they get dirty. It's something else to take care of, and it breaks and all that. All you need is a stiff bristle brush and a little bit of degreaser, and you just clean it outside. And the big key with all this is don't let the bike get completely trashed. Don't wait 6 months and then go and clean your bike, and you're gonna have to spend a day and a half to do it. Clean it often. You know, maybe once. It depends on how much you ride, but you know, basically once a month, clean it. Mark says, I just bought a park chain tool cleaner, and when I turn the chain backwards, the chain comes off. Is there anything having to do with Di2 or something else? You know, I'm not a big fan of those chain cleaners. You don't need it. It's just a gadget. So you'll hear me go on and on about that. You can't, you know, again, I'm not going to knock them. They do work. They do get your chain really clean. But you can do just as good a job with the method I showed in the video there. Let's see. Marissa asked a question. Front derailleur is a pain because in spite of adjusting it many times, it still pushes the chain off the large ring when shifting to the large ring. I can only safely shift up if the chain is in the middle of the rear cassette. Suggestions? Marissa, that's a really, really good question. It's a common problem. So what's happening is you're shifting to the big chainring and then it dumps off the outside. This most certainly is an issue with the front derailleur adjustment. And you know, I would say if you've tried to adjust it on your own and you've struggled with it, I would go to a pro and have a pro mechanic dial it in. And if the mechanic that you have works on your bike normally and it doesn't, he's not getting it, try a different mechanic. There could be other issues with, you know, the way that you're shifting, but probably not. Most likely is really just a simple adjustment. But some of the front derailleurs can be very, very tricky and problematic. So, you know, it shouldn't fall off. But if it does fall off, you can use my method. But, you know, it can be dangerous if your chain keeps falling off every time you shift. And just a note is you should be able to, if everything is adjusted right, you should be able to be in any cog in the back, any cog on any of the bikes built in the last 10 or 15 years. You can be any cog in the back and shift to the big chainring. Maybe it isn't ideal if you're in the easiest cog in the back, but it still should shift just fine. So anyway, so Dave says, can you show how to clean your bike and stuff without a stand? I can't show it to you, but basically the method is the same. You can just lean it up against a wall or something like that. You know, it's sort of the method is the same. It's just a little more. It's a little more clunky to do it without a stand. Jody says, what soap do you use on a bike frame? So I like to use bike-specific soaps. You don't have to. You can use Dawn detergent. A lot of people use that. The problem is the ones that are specific to bike frames are the soaps are non-corrosive to aluminum, and a lot of detergents that are available out there are bad for aluminum. You can also, if you search, usually they'll tell you, and sometimes you'll have to go to the manufacturer website and to find out if it's safe on aluminum. Like for instance, Simple Green is a product in the US you can get. It's inexpensive and it's a kind of a really strong detergent. Their Simple Green, their standard product, is not safe and is not really safe for bike finishes. But they actually do make a product. It's called Simple Green Aircraft, I believe. So just, it's not that expensive. You don't need a lot. You can also use a lot of the car soaps. They're inexpensive, readily available, and most of those are pretty good. But again, you need to check and make sure it's aluminum safe. Something kind of mild. You don't want a strong detergent. Mark, the other Mark, I can never seem to get the drivetrain like new. It always seems to have black spots. Is it just a matter of repeating the process over and over until it's finally clean, or just to accept that the bike is not going to be like new? So sometimes those spots could be wear spots and things, but it may just be kind of embedded grease there. And using a strong solvent will get it off. But honestly, if you're using the method I showed in the video, getting the bike clean, and if it's been really absolutely filthy, you're probably not going to get it like new. The only way to really get it like new, take all the parts off and soak them in a strong degreaser, just the metal parts, and you can actually get it super clean. And that's more of a deep, sort of like a rebuild. But I think I said in the chat here is, you know, just get the bike clean enough and ride and do yoga or meditate or do something else, you know. Dan says, what about rear derailleur jockey wheels? I often get a squeak there, even when the chain is clean and lubed. Do you lube them somehow? So it depends. So most jockey wheels on high-end road bikes now have a sealed cartridge bearing, and inside the bearing there are little ball bearings in there. It's a sealed bearing, and so there is grease in there. And so if you've used high pressure water at your derailleur, or if those bearings are squeaking, there's a very good chance that water has gotten inside those bearings. And if water's gotten in there and they're squeaking, they're shot. You could take them apart, pull the seal off, re-grease it, put it back, and maybe you'll get a little more life out of it. But once water gets in there, they're probably damaged, so you need to replace it. Now, many derailleur pulleys, instead of having ball bearings in there, it has like it's like a ceramic bearing. Basically, it's just a sleeve, and it's just rolling on two flat surfaces. If it's that and it's squeaking, you can put a little bit of lube in there and it'll stop it. So if your jockey wheels are squeaking, you probably need to take them apart and inspect it and clean it. They're tricky to clean. Sometimes you need to get in there with a pipe cleaner or a rag or something to get the grease when you clean the bike. Ron says, do you still lube the newer type treated cables, Durace, i.e. the Durace polymer shift cables? No, you do not need to lube those. They have they're self-lube, so generally you shouldn't. You don't have to. You actually can lube them, but you really don't have to, because they need to slide absolutely silky smooth. How often do you recommend, Mark says, how often do you recommend changing your chain? When it needs to be replaced. How do you know? Is you can buy for a very reasonable price, you can get a chain measurement tool. And it basically shows you, it's a go, no go tool. It basically shows you when the chain is good and then when the chain is worn and needs to be replaced. But generally, most manufacturers say 1,500 miles. But I've seen chains wear out in 300 miles, and I've seen chains last 6,000 miles. So you can just change it no matter what at 1,500 miles, or you can buy a $5 chain measurement tool and replace it when it needs to be replaced. Now, there are a lot of tricks to actually use a ruler to measure your chain, but the truth is that's not really going to do it. You really do need the tool. Chains don't stretch. It's those rollers inside the chain that wear, and that's what you need to measure. So hope that answers your question. How about dirt? Dave says, how about dirt that doesn't want to wipe off in the frame area just above the chain? It's getting so black. You need to be careful, but you may want to use a little bit of solvent there. It should come off. Often that black stuff is like, sometimes it gets all spotty and stuff, and that's usually because the finish of the frame is starting to get damaged. If you have a titanium frame, you can use a heavy solvent. It's not going to hurt it. If you have a carbon frame, you need to be a little careful. Sometimes using some kind of wax compound will get that out. But the idea is to keep that from happening. That's the whole point of this. So Robert Sandberg says, although you mentioned that a bike stand by name, would you say that once again? Oh, yes. That stand that I prefer is from a company called Feedback Sports. You know, there's lots of good bike stands on the market, but that one is by far my favorite. They make several different models, and it's the one I have. I actually have about 6 of them, and I have one that holds the bike. So some of the carbon bikes you can't clip. There's no place to clamp on the seat post, and so you'll need one that holds the bike without touching the frame. And Feedback Sports actually makes one, as does Park Tool. And they're really nice. They're aluminum. They're lightweight. They come with a little carrying case. You can take it with you. So highly recommend that. Let's see. Matt says, another thought I haven't used, but I know others have, is wrap the area with a Mylar film available from many auto parts stores. So what he's talking about is, I think, where you can cover the frame to keep it from getting damaged with this clear film, especially in the chain area where the chain may hit the frame on a bumpy road. So there are a few items. I'm trying to think of the brand. If you look up that Mylar film, they use it for skis, to cover the top of snow skis to keep them from getting scratched. And it's also known as propeller tape because they use it on propellers of airplanes. They used to anyway. And it's basically a thick Mylar tape. I usually, if you go on eBay, you can find it really cheap. And I like the 3M brand, and the stuff is really thick. You just peel and stick. I get a big wide piece like this, and then I just cut it and I use it on the frame to protect the frame in areas where I want. And the stuff is incredibly tough. And then when it gets all ripped up and stuff, you can take it off. It won't damage the frame and put another piece on. So let's see. Christina says, how can the idler and lower pulley be cleaned with the degreaser and the brush? So yeah, that's what I do. So that stiff bristle brush is hold it from the side and put the bristle brush on the pulley and just pedal the bike backwards, and that'll scrub the pulleys. Now that's not going to get 100% of it. When you're washing the bike like that, you're not going to get the pulleys really, really spotless. You can, but you're probably going to end up injecting water into the bearing. So just scrub it with the brush. And then after you rinse and after you clean the bike, take your rag and just carefully get in there and wipe it clean manually with a rag and maybe pipe cleaners or something. I usually don't use the pipe cleaners. I'm too lazy. Just using a rag there works really well. And just remember, you know, keeping the bike clean and lubing it properly is probably 90% of this. Is if you keep it clean, that you're not going to get that gunk buildup. If you use the right kind of lube, you're not going to get that gunk buildup. So nobody's asked this question, but on lubes, so everybody has an opinion on what lube is good and bad. One thing that I've discovered, I'm not super keen on any lube that has Teflon in it. So they do actually work really well, and they keep the chain clean and all that. But here's the problem with the Teflon lubes that I've discovered is the Teflon lubes tend to cake, because Teflon it's like a plastic almost, and it's almost like a waxy film, and it gets all over the frame and all over everything, and it cakes up. And I've seen it where it actually clogged up the cogs because people use so much of it. So that's my note on some of the Teflon lubes. I know people like them, and most bike lubes have Teflon in them, but I prefer the ones that do not. So Jody says, my bike shoes often brush or hit my chainstay. All the paint is gone there. Anything I can put there to protect the frame, or should I worry about it? You should worry about it, especially if you have a carbon frame. You could definitely damage the frame. I've seen it. I've seen people have frames that are ruined. That protecting film, that Mylar film that I talked about just a second ago, that's what you want to put there. Clean the frame. You know, some people, just the way their bodies are, their heel may hit the frame. That happens to me. And that's okay. That's just the way your body is. But you do need to protect your frame, and that Mylar film is the way to go for sure. So we're rolling. Let me just check the time. We're good. Let's see. Michael, carbon seat post, aluminum frame, grease or no grease? Okay. Carbon seat post, all seat posts, any material, grease it. Carbon seat posts will seize, and when you have two dissimilar materials, there's like you get corrosion between them, and actually a seat post, it often happens, can actually weld to the frame, literally seizes together, and you'll never be able to move your seat post. So pretty much all seat posts you should lube. If it's carbon to carbon and you lube it, sometimes they slip. If you want to you want to grease it and keep it from slipping, use an anti-seize compound in there. They make carbon to carbon products for this, and it's basically like a grease with a grit to it. So that'll keep it from seizing and also keep it from slipping. But you definitely want to always grease it. Mark says, what about wet or dry lube? I prefer usually the dry lubes. Not all of them, but almost all of them are Teflon, so I tend to not like those as much. I do like the wet lubes. Pro Gold is my favorite, although there's quite a few other really good ones, and I constantly have a barrage of them coming through. I get product samples they send me, and there's so many that are good. You know, you just gotta try what works, and it's different for your environment too, depending on where you live and what the environment is. There's different lubes that you may want to use. Will lube displace water from the chain? That's from Larry. Yes, it will. I guess you're referring to riding in the rain, possibly. So pretty much across the board, all lubes will get washed off in the rain. Nearly all of them. So, you know, some of the heavier greasy ones will stay on in the rain, but usually they'll wash off. So the lube will displace the water. You know, it is really important that if you do ride in the rain that day, when you get home, you really need to lube the chain. Otherwise, it'll rust. Gary says, what's the best way to clean the braking surface on the rims? Wow, that's good. So depending on the rim material, generally what I like to do is kind of not noxious at all, is just use rubbing alcohol, put it on a rag, and wipe the rim surface. That's good. Rim surfaces get dirty with grease, and they also get embedded with debris from the road, and also the brake pads actually burn onto the rim, and it puts like this glaze on there, and you need to get that off. So rubbing alcohol is the first defense. That's easy. That'll take off most of the grease. It's not going to hurt anything. Well, you wouldn't want to get it all over your tires because it will dry the tire out. Let's see. The other thing that you can do is if you have an aluminum rim or even carbon, you can use acetone on the brake surface, but acetone is pretty toxic, and you got to be really careful depending on the material and your specific rim. Check with your manufacturer. And then lastly is I like Brillo pads. You know, Brillo that you clean dishes with. There's industrial versions of that, or you can just get a regular one that you clean dishes with, and you almost like you sand the brake surface. And I go to that in length in the basic bicycle maintenance class. Okay, Mark says, how do you know when to clean my bottom bracket? I guess you mean to take it apart and clean it. So most modern bikes have sealed bearings on the bottom brackets, and there's really not a lot to do. It's either works or you replace it. Although you can take them apart, I don't recommend it unless you're a real pro. Just for the most part, they're designed, modern bottom brackets are designed to be good or replace it. So hope that answers. Matt says, on a carbon frame, micro cracks happen. Often have it checked professionally. Absolutely super advice. Let's see. Wing says, WD-40 to clean the chain, yes or no? Yeah, it works. It's a pretty good solvent, but it's going to pick up dirt. I don't recommend it, and it stinks. You don't need it. You don't really need it. Just use a good quality lube, and pretty much across the board, all good quality cycling lubes, they are solvents, and they're also designed specifically for this purpose, so they're not going to pick up dirt like WD-40 would, and they're not greasy. Jessica says, how often do you all find you need to replace shoe cleats? Happens all the time. Cleats wear. It depends. You know, there's some things you need to check because they get a lot of slop in them when they wear. It depends on the brand of pedal you have. But what I like to do is I take the shoe, clip it into the pedal without your foot in there, and just try and see how much play you have in it. If you start to have a lot of play in the pedals and the cleats, then it's time to replace it. Otherwise, just visually inspect. You'll know. Edwin says, what to use for bike polishing after you use soap and water. I like what's it called? Bike Lust from Pedro's. It's a spray-on stuff. I'm not sure what it is. It's like a silicone thing, and it works fantastic. There's a product called BTS, bow to stern. It's for boats.